My name is Ventura. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst. I've been in behavior analysis for almost 20 years now. I owned an ABA therapy company for about 10 years. After that, I started investing in other ABA companies, a lot of technology companies. I'm in the process of getting an AI company in behavior analysis going right now. And in Miami, we have a hustle culture. Money is a very powerful reinforcer for people that live here. What does your work-life balance look like? My sort of work-life balance is working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and I'm happy to do that. How often people want to work, get them to fit into your organization based on what they can contribute. I like to focus on outcomes and say, these are the outcomes that we expect from you. I liked coming up with those outcome goals and then allowing people to come up with clever ways of solving those problems. Do you just want success? I've fallen into that trap a whole bunch of times where I just want success so quickly, so I'm willing to break rules. It ends up coming back around and causing a problem for you.
Well, maybe we can start by, tell us your name, a little bit of like a brief introduction, who you are, what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Ventura. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst. I've been in behavior analysis for almost 20 years now. I was an adjunct professor at Florida International University for over 10 years. I actually just stopped teaching maybe about 2 years ago so that I can finish my PhD. And I owned an ABA therapy company for about 10 years and sold the company in 2018. After that, I started investing in other ABA companies, a lot of technology companies. I'm in the process of getting an AI company in behavior analysis going right now called Intraverbal AI.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're pretty excited about that. I've also worked on setting up a large network of other ABA therapy companies in different states over the course of the past 6-7 years. I actually wrote 3 different books in behavior analysis, one on leadership, one on performance feedback, and one on professionalism.
Great.
So
yeah, I mean, that's huge breadth of experiences and topics. I mean, something that sort of surprised me for its uniqueness from your profile is that background maybe in entrepreneurship, business, consultant for other businesses. If you could tell us a bit more about that, how do you develop that repertoire to assist other companies to get established and grow?
yeah, it's something I really enjoy doing. I see entrepreneurship as problem solving. So when you start a business, you're solving a problem or you don't stay in business. You're either bringing a product or service to the marketplace that doesn't exist, or you're bringing a product or service to the marketplace that's better than what's out there. So you're improving on an existing product or service, or you're bringing a new one. And I really enjoy the process of getting things started, starting new projects. I learned, because I ran an ABA therapy company for, as I said, almost 10 years, and I learned that I don't love running companies for that long, but I like getting them started. I like working with other people to get things started. I think that entrepreneurship and behavior analysis is one of the best vehicles for dissemination possible. So what better way to communicate the value of our science than producing a product or service that benefits the community in some way? And then we can say, well, we've infused this product or service with behavior analysis science, and that's why it works well. So I like to start businesses with other behavior analysts. It's great working with other behavior analysts because they're very they engage in a lot of praise, a lot of positive reinforcement, so it's usually easy to work with them. I like starting businesses within the field and businesses outside of the field, and that's really where that dissemination piece comes in.
Interesting. Calls my attention that you say that you don't feel as satisfied staying in running a business for a long time. Is it a different skill set that you need to start a business as opposed to running, maintaining long-term a business?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you start a business, you identify a gap, you identify a problem that needs to be solved, and you get things started. Everybody's excited at that point. Leadership looks different when you're getting started versus maintaining. Getting started, it's great because you're discussing your vision with the people that you're working with, and you're connecting the everyday behaviors that you're engaged in with that vision. And you're saying, if you continue to do this, eventually we're going to discover and create this wonderful vision. When you're maintaining a company, so starting versus maintaining, when you're maintaining the company, you don't contact reinforcement on as dense a schedule as you do when you're starting a company. And you deal with a lot of the same problems over and over again. And growth is a lot slower. And growth for me is extremely reinforcing. I like to see a company go from 0 customers to 1, or 0 revenue to $1, to $100, to $1,000, to $1 million. That's really reinforcing to me. Where when you're running a company, there's a lot of ebbs and flows. The progress doesn't look like, a diagonal line going up. It's a slow, meandering line that eventually goes up if you do things correctly. So I really think it's a schedule of reinforcement issue that I like the frequency with which my behavior is reinforced when you start a new company versus run an existing one.
Mm-hmm. And when do you know that your role is up for fading? I mean, when do you know that the company has grown enough so that you can fade yourself out and then you can move on to the next project?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm constantly on the lookout for that. And I always see it in the behavior of the other people that I'm working with. And I find some of the behavioral cues that I'll notice are a problem comes up and I don't have to prompt the person that I'm working with to take care of the problem. They just independently go and take care of the problem, and then they'll ask and they'll be like, how did that go? And I'm like, perfect. I almost have no feedback for them at that point. When I realize that they're operating independently and my feedback is really, great job doing this, great job doing that, providing a lot of positive reinforcement and positive feedback for what they did, then I know it's time for me to start fading myself out. And you'll notice that if you do a good job leading the people that you're working with, providing regular feedback, creating a good culture, that fading process will happen on its own. You'll see that people operate independently. So I think maybe that's the clearest indicator is independent functioning by the people that you've partnered with.
Mm-hmm. And in what capacity do you provide that leadership? Is it that people seek after your advice, or you're invested in this entrepreneurial project as a stakeholder? What is the typical role in which you step in?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. I find projects that I'm excited about working on, that's really important to me. Whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to enjoy it. I want to be passionate about it. I think good leadership springs from your passion to work on a project. So if you look at the meaning of passion, it comes from the Latin word passio, which means to suffer. And when you say that you're passionate about something, it means that you're willing to suffer for it. You're willing to get up earlier than usual. You're willing to work later than usual. You're willing to sacrifice time with your friends and sometimes your family, which isn't great, but you're willing to make all of those sacrifices to make it work. So people see that and they get excited about it. So I'm always on the lookout for good people that I can work with. One of the lessons that I've learned over the years is that your product or your service is important, but it's secondary to the people that you work with. If you've got good people that you're working with, then really anything is possible. You know, you can grow nothing into something if you're working with the right people. So
And how do you, I mean, you have a long experience. How that role evolves over time? Do you find yourself going back to the same colleagues, collaborators with which you've, created companies or projects in the past?
yeah, that's a really important question as well. I do go back to people that I've worked with in the past and I ask them for recommendations. One of the things that I really dislike doing is putting out an ad on Indeed, because you'll get, especially if it's a remote position, you'll get hundreds of applicants that you have to sift through. I'd much rather find somebody as a referral through somebody I already know. Or I'd rather find someone in my network that I feel would work great for the project that I'm working on. That's really important to me because I know those people, they know me, they know how I work, they know my strengths, my weaknesses. And same thing with them. I know what their reinforcers are, what they expect of me, and it's easy to work with them. So yeah, I like to work with people I know. I think if you want to be good in business, if you want to be successful, effective at business, you need to have a strong network. You need to try to have a diverse network, a large network. And when I say diverse, I mean not just diverse skill sets, but diverse interests. You know, somebody that might be interested in doing a project in schools. Somebody else might be interested in doing a project in technology. Somebody else might be interested in doing a project in the community somehow. So if you have different people in your professional network that have different interests, then you can reach out to them when an opportunity presents itself and say, hey, would you like to work on this project with me? And that's where I've had the most success.
That's so interesting. And going back to, I mean, your portfolio, you've helped develop all these different companies. What is, in your opinion, nowadays, the different profiles or the different types of companies that applied behavior analysis as a field can allow? I mean, of course, we are used to the small to middle size ABA service provider for kids with developmental disability. I mean, that's probably the standard service that is developed within the field. But I'm more interested in the variety and the potential for other types of companies that would be possible within the field. What's your opinion on that?
The potential is limitless. Where our expertise is human behavior, and human behavior is involved in every industry, every human endeavor, whatever it is. I think the key is, unfortunately, funding. So ABA therapy is easy in a sense because the funding is provided by Medicaid or insurance companies or some sort of payer out there. When we take behavior analysis outside of that domain, we have to convince other people to pay us for those services. And that's what most businesses have to do. And it's a bit of a shock to the system for somebody that was running an ABA therapy company to step outside of that realm and convince someone to write them a check or transfer money to them or give them their credit card number. And you really have to convince them that what you're doing is going to make a difference in their lives somehow. And that's where that passionate piece comes in, and you usually find the most passionate people when they have an interest in that particular topic. So I think that's really the barrier to entry for a lot of behavior analysts is convincing the outside public to give them money for what they're doing.
Can you think of maybe a success story of that followed that path, and maybe an unusual application of behavior science?
I've seen so many, and it's interesting because I've been involved in so many projects, and to be honest with you, I've had more failures than successes, and it's been a lot of contingency-shaped behavior. So I've learned what works and what didn't by trial and error, unfortunately, because there was no playbook for going outside of the field. I think the easiest answer to your question, though, is probably OBM, so Organizational Behavior Management. So there's always companies out there that are looking to improve the performance of their staff. So I think that's where I've had the most success. I've had success doing consultation with people in schools. So those are probably the two domains where I've seen the most success. I've worked with people that have done health and fitness projects and organizations outside of our field. I've worked with people in technology that have had success outside of our field. So it just depends on the industry. It depends on who you're working with. But I would say those are the fields that I've had the most success personally.
I don't want to leave you without learning a bit more about that project on artificial intelligence. That sounds so unique within our field, and I guess we're going to see more of that in the near future as applications of AI generalize.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're working on a project called Intraverbal AI, and anybody that's interested can go to our website and find out a little bit more about what it's about. But we like to refer to it as an immortality project, and we want to create a collective consciousness of behavior analysis understanding there at that organization. We want to take so much of the information that's out there in journals and books, and we want to bring it together into one place. And there's some challenges that you have to work around. There's some legal challenges. There's some ethical challenges. But we're pretty excited about it. That's phase one of what we're doing. The next couple of phases are going to involve a clinical project that's going to help behavior analysts out in the field, and an academic project that's going to help researchers and instructors at universities. And something I would be remiss if I didn't bring up is that we're not doing an artificial intelligence project. We call our company Intraverbal AI, but the AI doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. It stands for augmented intelligence. And the difference between the two is with artificial intelligence, those projects and products tend to replace workers, replace tasks for workers. What we're trying to do is augment the services the behavior analysts are providing by assisting them. We don't want to replace anyone. We don't want to replace the human element of behavior analysis. We want to make the knowledge and understanding of behavior analysis from the last 50, 60 years available to behavior analysts while they're working with their clients, regardless of the field. So that's an important distinction between a lot of other companies out there, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to augment practice, not replace it.
So the idea would be to have some kind of an all-knowing mentor within your fingertips that you could ask questions or ask for advice, for judgment?
I don't know that we ever want to create something that's all-knowing. I don't know that that's possible. I think if it's possible, it would be irresponsible. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create systems, a network of systems that specialize in different areas of behavior analysis, whether it be clinical or OBM or a variety of different subdomains of behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis. I think that's probably a discussion for a whole nother video, but having an all-knowing system, I don't know how helpful that would be. It sounds like it would be more hurtful than helpful. So we're trying to create a collective consciousness of information in specific areas of behavior analysis, and we want to get other behavior analysts to help contribute to that. Really create a community of information.
Yeah, yeah. And you think maybe this is asking too much, but some of the, latest versions of the chatbots that are out there, like ChatGPT and similar systems, when you ask them a question, sometimes they provide context on the caveats or the limitations of the input that they are providing. So I guess that would be an important feature for the user to be aware of the limitations of the input that the system can provide.
Absolutely, and part of what we're doing with our system, for example, is every answer is coupled with the source from where the answer came from. So that's a common problem with ChatGPT and some of the other large language models that are out there, is they tend to hallucinate. I was working on a project just the other day where I was looking for publicly available data on a particular topic. So I just asked ChatGPT and it gave me an answer. And I'm like, wow, this just saved me a whole bunch of time. And then I was sending the data over to a colleague, and he responded back and he said, are you sure this data is accurate? And I'm like, I didn't take the time to verify it. And then all I had to do was ask ChatGPT, where did you get this information from? And it was very honest with me in a sense and said, well, I just generated this data here as a placeholder. So that does represent some of the dangers of using large language models. And as I said, what we're trying to do at Intraverbal AI is part of what our phase 1 of our system does is it provides sources for all of that data. Just like if you're writing an academic paper, if you're going to publish somewhere and get it peer reviewed, you have to include your sources. You have to cite appropriately where everything comes from. So that's a big part of what we're working on as well, to ensure that our system and our organization has credibility in that area.
Interesting. And do you envision any applications for learning? For example, it could be like a study aid for a student that just is getting into behavior analysis.
100%, and that's a big part of what we're working on. And AI is fundamentally going to change so many things. And one of the areas or one of the domains that it's going to change dramatically is education. So throughout history, education has been primarily about getting the right answer. So it's been primarily intraverbal training, right? Now, if you've got a system that doesn't know everything, nothing knows everything, but if it knows most things, then what should we be teaching students? Should we be teaching students to get the right answer, or should we be teaching students to ask the right question? And I think that's where AI is going to change education, is it's going to be changing it from primarily intraverbal training to primarily man training. And I think there's going to be that transition, and it's going to be happening over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's already happening right now. I taught at the university level for over a decade, as we discussed earlier. I have a lot of sympathy for the instructors at universities right now, because if they assign any work for the students to do at home, it becomes a problem, because how do they know what's legitimately the students' own work or something they just generated from one of these large language models? So I think there's going to be a little bit of pushback. I think it's already happening right now, where instructors are going to try to use other AI systems to detect this type of work. But I think eventually ChatGPT and some of the other large language models are going to move past that. And I think education is going to have to make that shift from intraverbal training to primarily man training. There's still going to be some intraverbal training because you have to know things to ask things. But getting people to pinpoint the right questions is going to be critical. That was something, last thing I'll say on this is that was something that I loved that my parents did when I was a kid. I would come home and instead of my parents asking me, what did you learn today in school? They would say, did you ask the right questions? What questions did you ask? And that really stuck with me. And now that we have the technology to assist with that, I think that's a transition we're going to see.
And pretty much in line with the notion of education that Skinner advocated for, in which the motivation of the student is important, because if you want people to mend, then they need to feel motivated about something or excited about something. So that sort of underlines the student's motivation and individual interests and in the learning process. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because the best way to use large language models, in my opinion, is as an iterative process, to have a back and forth with it. And you ask one question and it does a pretty good job, and we'll just use ChatGPT as an example. It does a pretty good job of giving you follow-up questions to ask too. So you'll ask, let's say that I was just doing some research the other day on conjugate reinforcement, which isn't talked about often. And I asked a particular question, it gave me an answer, and then it suggested 3 or 4 follow-up questions. And it's something that I'm interested in, as you pointed out. So I just clicked on it, low response effort. I clicked on the question. It gave me more information. And I kept doing that and found myself sitting there for 45 minutes learning a lot. But I wasn't just learning more about conjugate reinforcement. I was learning about what questions to ask that got me, what questions would provide me with the most salient reinforcement on that particular topic. So it's really interesting the interactions that we're having with the systems now, and I'm excited to see where it will be just a year from now.
yeah, and it's also a process that always, that could lead you to the voids of knowledge. So as you keep asking questions, eventually you get to a point where there are no answers, or so it's also an interesting way to identify what are the limitations of what we know, and what else could we learn, through research and other means.
Yeah, I think, that's really interesting actually, because right now the large language models only know what we know. So it's done a great job of bringing all that information together, collating it into one place for you to ask those questions, but it doesn't know anything that we don't know yet. But when I think when it starts interacting with the outside environment, outside of that digital environment, just like we do, we learn from interacting with our environments. So once it starts interacting with the outside environment, I think that's where it's going to start producing information that we don't know. And I think that's what a lot of AI researchers are referring to when they talk about generative intelligence. So it's definitely going to be interesting. We'll see how things go.
Yeah. Going back to our field, more mundane maybe issues relating to applications of behavior analysis. You've also been involved in developing ethical standards for companies, and I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about what are or could be the applications for certifications and standards, but not for individuals, which is pretty standard these days, but for companies, and what are the quality standards, and could there be a certification process for companies as there are for individuals?
We explored that a while ago. That was a project that I worked on with Dr. Bailey so many years ago. I think it was in 2014, 15, something like that. And I explored the idea of a credentialing organization with regards to ethics for ABA companies. And I did it out of frustration because I thought when I got into business that if you provided the best product or service and you did a good job treating your customers well, that your company would be your company would do well, it would perform well, it would grow, it would expand. But that wasn't always the case. And I learned very quickly that people did business in a way that I felt was unethical. So I started talking about it at conferences, and I started having regular discussions with Dr. Bailey about it. And we created something called COEBO. And it was just an acronym for ethics of behavioral organizations. And I had that same idea of certification. But when you start learning about that process, that credentialing process, it's very complicated. You have to have a lot of resources. You have to have a lot of people that are committed. And the most important thing that I learned about that project is that everybody runs their company in a different way. And there's so many, just inside the United States, there's so many different cultures, there's so many different ways to run a business. And while I was frustrated with the way some people in my neck of the woods were doing business, I recognized that if we were to put in some sort of, even if it was best practices, even if it was just guidelines, that it may work well for us, let's say where I live in Miami, Florida, but it wouldn't work well in other states. It became complicated to make something like that work.
Would you say that organizational cultures are shaped locally, where you see certain standards, let's say in Florida and others in maybe California or other places, and that poses a challenge for the field?
Oh yes, absolutely. And this was something that I learned personally. So when I started my company, like everyone else, your company is small. It's a one-person company. And I did things the way that I thought worked best for me. And as the company grew, and I'll use my local area here as an example, we set up a system that worked well for Miami. But then as soon as we expanded into the rest of the state, so we moved into Fort Lauderdale, which is just north of Miami, they did things just slightly differently. And then we moved into the central part of Florida and the north part of Florida. They did things much differently. When I eventually sold my company, we had just under 300 employees in 3 different states. And one of the states that we were in was in Virginia, and they did things very differently in Virginia. And then the other state that we were in was New York, and they did things very differently from Virginia and from Florida. So as our company grew, we found that we had different policies and procedures for Miami versus Virginia versus New York. So even within our own organization, we didn't have the same rules. Now, we had the same vision, the same company mission, the same company values, and you can extract ethical guidelines from the company vision, mission, and values, but it becomes murky the bigger the company gets. And I applied that same thinking to the project that we were working on, where we would come up with ethical standards, one set of ethical standards to run a business across the entire nation, and just realize that from my perspective, it wouldn't work the way that I'd like it to work. If we're sitting at the top of the organization, we're not as smart as the collective whole. There's gonna be somebody at the organization that's gonna find a more clever way of solving a problem than you do, because they're doing it every single day. In my organizations, I try my best to shape and maintain that behavior over time of coming up with creative solutions to solving unique problems. I was just having a meeting earlier today talking about the difference between Miami, Florida, and another state that some of my colleagues have an ABA therapy business in. And in Miami, we have a hustle culture. People want to work here. Money is a very powerful reinforcer for people that live here. Money isn't a powerful reinforcer for people that live in other states. And it's interesting, money's a generalized condition reinforcer. You would assume that it's its power is ubiquitous and it's everywhere, but it's not. Money isn't the same for people here that live in other places. And in other places, they value their time off more. And that's great, good for them. Everybody, what matters to individuals is great for them. Whatever works for them is what works for them. So I think culture, in the sense that how much do you want to work, is what does your work-life balance look like? People always talk about work-life balance, but it's different for everyone. For some people, it's I enjoy working. So my sort of work-life balance is working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and I'm happy to do that. Other people, it's working less than 40 hours per week, and that's okay. And I think it's important to identify how often people want to work, and get them to fit into your organization based on what they can contribute. And don't try to force them into your system. And that was something that I learned early on, was I like to set outcome measures versus behavior measures. And you need both, obviously, but I preferred to set outcome goals and say, listen, this is what we need to do. So you create, you have an organizational scorecard, and that kind of trickles down to, or cascades down into individual director and employee scorecards as well. But I like to focus on outcomes and say, these are the outcomes that we expect from you. And obviously it's a scorecard, so it's not just billable hours. You want to make sure that you're having success with the clients that you're working with, obviously. You want to make sure that the families are happy with you. You want to make sure that your employees are happy, in a sense, working at the organization. So there's a lot of factors that are involved in there, but I liked coming up with those outcome goals and then allowing people to come up with clever ways of solving those problems. Because if we're sitting, quote unquote, at the top of the organization, myself and let's say 7 or 8 other people making these decisions, we're not as smart as the collective whole. Especially if you have 250 people working at your organization and you have 6 or 7 people making decisions for everyone there, there's going to be somebody at the organization that's going to find a more clever way of solving a problem than you do, because they're doing it every single day. So they're going to have unique knowledge about the nuances of their job. And they're going to say, you know what, this is a more efficient and effective way for me to meet this goal than what you're proposing. Now, you have problems with this sometimes because employment law doesn't like that in a lot of states. Employment law wants you to treat everyone the same way. And that becomes problem. It becomes an issue with allowing people to express their creativity in solving problems. So in my organizations, I try my best to shape and maintain that behavior over time of coming up with creative solutions to solving unique problems. Instead of saying, here's a cookie cutter way of doing it, you have to do it this way. What do you think is the best way to go about that? Something another behavior analyst that I have a lot of respect for, Paul Gavoni, says all the time is, in coaching, you have to move from telling to asking. So I like talking to people about what the mission of the organization is and describing the vision to them, getting them excited about it, and then asking them, what's the best way to go about achieving that mission and discovering that vision?